When you have more acetylcholine, you can retrieve, store information easier, but more importantly, you can transfer that information to other parts of the brain much faster. So they have time to come up with a new motor solution before the opportunity is over. So that's why they can very easily transfer motor skill. They can go to their experience, then they can create a solution and transfer that fast enough so that there won't be a lag in the execution of the movement. It won't feel odd. It's like when someone doesn't have that capacity, when someone's like programming or speed in the brain is slower, that's when they do a new exercise and it just feels off. You feel like, okay, it doesn't feel natural. That's because the speed of transfer from one skill or the solution you created is just not fast enough.
That was Coach Christian Thibaudeau speaking on the brain, neurotransmitters, and the speed of skill acquisition in exercise. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Welcome to another episode of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith, and here on episode 143, we have back on the show Coach Christian Thibaudeau. Coach Thibaudeau is a master not only of all things bodybuilding, strength training, and athletic performance, but he also is incredibly talented in the world of psychology, psychological assessment, and brain science. And he has blended those worlds together in his neurotyping system, which our first two episodes together he spoke in depth on, particularly episode 1. So really quickly before we do get started, if you have not listened to the prior episodes or you are not familiar with neurotyping, I would actually highly recommend that you go back and listen to episodes 77 and 99. If you don't feel like doing that right now, I totally understand. Maybe you're driving down the road and it would probably not be safe to try to backlog this podcast to 77. That being said, to minimize any inconvenience, it just really quickly, this is the quick rundown of neurotyping. I am a neurotyping certified. I've gone through the course. It is amazing. It's everything that you've heard of that Christian's talked about on his own website in this podcast and much, much more. But essentially, it stems from originally there was a lot of talk with Charles Poliquin and the 5 elements and the book The Edge Effect, which I would have been into that stuff for a long time, long before I heard of the neurotyping system. But essentially, Christian has grouped athletes into 5 distinctive types based off their neurotransmitter profiles and which neurotransmitters they seek, that they have a lower resting level of generally, and that they seek to acquire. So, for example, type 1s, there's a 1A and a 1B. They're dopamine-seeking athletes. They want to do things that give them that dopamine rush. So, on an outside level, would be like risk-taking, like riding a fast motorcycle, extreme sports, those types of things. But in the gym or in training, these are athletes who really thrive off intense movements, plyometrics, heavy weightlifting, speed, anything that's fast and explosive and intense. And the 1A is more of intensity driven, a muscle tension driven. So less of an elastic athlete. Think of Ben Johnson. Think of someone who has a huge squat and is just a ball of muscle, basically, that prototype. And also, there's certain psychological characteristics tagged to that. The type 1B, I think Carl Lewis, explosive athlete who is a little bit more elastic in nature, responds better to plyometrics and elastic training. Or think Zach LaVine in pro basketball, someone who's just incredibly able to use the sensitivity of the muscle spindles and transfer energy throughout the body. Then you have the type 2s, which are adrenaline sensitive, although Christian on the show today is actually going to talk about how the type 2B is a little different in this regards. And these are athletes who are they are a little bit less nervous system driven, a little bit more muscle driven. The 2A is really a balance. It's half muscle driven, half neural driven, so responds well to a lot of different types of training, a lot of variety in training. Responds well to layers of training, like doing some power, then strength, then some conditioning work in one session. 2B being all muscle driven, more of a bodybuilding kind of typology, if you will. Doesn't respond to doing something that's neurally intense every session. The type 2s, also compared to the type 1s, are known for being a little bit more reward driven. They seek affirmation from their social group. They're more team player type people, where type 1s may be a little bit more of the team leaders. They tend not to care quite as much about of what others think of them. Type 3 is characterized by precision, and so they are people who they are sensitive to serotonin. They have high dopamine resting typically, and they seek out things that can increase their serotonin level. So that's why they tend to enjoy predictable endurance events, and they tend to really favor precision in their workouts. So that's a quick summary of the three types. I don't want to take too much more time in this intro covering them, but again, I would go back and check into that on old episodes if you could. So again, I'm really thankful to have someone as intelligent and brilliant and cutting edge as Christian on this show. So you may think, if you've listened to the last two episodes with him, how can we put more information out, one up what we've done so far? Well, Christian does that and more, and this is a two-pronged episode with some really incredible information. The first about 40 minutes is a deep dive into child development, neurology, and what it takes to make a elite athlete from a young age, especially before the age of 2. And so not only that, but also Christian gives his take on the tendency of people to overcoach young athletes, and why great natural athletes, natural talent is often labeled as uncoachable. So the first 40 minutes and it also, that part really resonates with some things that other guests on this show have said, Dr. Tommy John, Jeremy Frisch, and many others. And so a great 40 minutes. I took a ton of notes on that. The second part is all about his recent advances and ideas and thoughts in the neurotyping system. And this talk is going to particularly revolve around the type like 2Bs and the type 3s. And so these athletes who don't, it's like you can throw French contrast at athletes or an explosive lifting program at athletes, and the 1As or the 1Bs and the 2As will just soak it up and respond really well. And even 1As, or throw 5-3-1 at a 1A, and they can really benefit from that type of program. But what do you do with a type 2B? And you have the team or group doing French contrast, or type 3. What are some alternatives for those athletes, especially if their sport is not bodybuilding, if they're going for athletic performance and they're looking to increase their speed or their sports skill? It's important to be well-rounded. And as coaches, we need to have solutions for all these different types of athletes in different training situations. So, and that whole conversation also takes a turn into not only how to train those athletes, but also the role of weight training, barbell training, muscle, basically anything that stimulates an athlete from a muscle perspective, and how that can tie into the sports skill, not even in a potentiation manner, if you will, or what's also been called like a fatigue and then a new motor solution, but rather what Christian talks about, the sensitivity effect of barbells and skill training. And it actually fits into a lot of really cool research that's been done lately. So, I would say like this podcast, the first part and the second part aren't really entirely related, but they're both almost awesome, complete episodes in their own right. And I think this episode actually set the record for the most notes I've ever taken on a show because there was so much good stuff. So I would actually encourage you to possibly listen to it in shifts because it's really just that good. And so, anyways, let's get down to the episode. Again, it is an incredible honor to have someone as brilliant as Christian back on the show. If you want to also learn more about him and what he's doing, check out his website at thibarmy.com, Thibarmy. And he also has a new neurotyping assessment form if you want to figure out your own neurotype and take a survey for that. With that being said, let's get on to the show with Christian Thibaudeau. I was going to ask, you're a new dad now, and how long do you think it takes to kind of figure out what your child's neurotype is based off their predisposition? Their dispositions.
Actually, the thing is that are we recording?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Because the reason I'm asking the question for all the listeners out there is that you probably missed out on almost 30 minutes of kick-ass material because the best stuff is always before the podcast. But to answer the question, I think that you need the brain to be fully formed. And of course, the brain is always constantly evolving, and it won't be like fully developed until about 2022. But it will largely be what it will become at around 10 to 12. You can still get clues before that, but before 10 to 12, it's still time to change. But the real thing, though, is, and that's something that's dear to my heart because as a new dad, here's how my brain works. I always work by what I'm passionate about. So if I'm passionate about a topic at the moment, I will become a savant on that topic within 3 months because I will spend 25 hours a day thinking about that topic and making connection with all what I have already acquired. And so right now I'm actually working on a book, and it's going to be a seminar also, and it's going to be called "Your Kid Sucks and It's Your Fault." And basically, I look at what needs to be done to optimize a kid's chance of becoming a great athlete. So from childbirth to professional level, for example, what you need to do step by step to optimize that. And one of the biggest problem I see with parenting is that modern parents, castrate their kids' chances of being a great athlete before the first year of life is over. And for most people, before the second year of life is over. And that starts with underdeveloping the 3 key systems responsible for what we call natural skills. Okay, when we talk about someone as is God-given skills, God-given ability, natural talent. Okay, natural talent is not natural talent. It's given by someone, and it's not by God. Natural talent is given by the parents. And it all starts, the foundation is built in the first 2 years of life. What you do with your kid during those first 2 years will build the foundation upon which everything else can be built later on. And if you don't do the right things, or even worse, if you do the wrong things, you will always be a step behind regardless of what you do afterwards. You can still fix something that has not been done optimally, but there will always be some problematic area, whenever it comes to motivation, discipline, drive, confidence, or even motor skills themselves. So to get back to what I call natural talent or natural ability, it depends really on 2 things, 2 main things. And the first one is movement skills, the capacity to move and interact with your milieu and react to something in your environment and move properly, move quickly, move precisely. So it's balance. It is adjustment to your environment. And that depends on 3 key systems: the visual system, the vestibular system, and the proprioceptive system, mostly your hands and your feet. And the hardware for these systems is laid out in the first 2 years of life. The kid needs to have as much stimulation for these 3 systems as possible. Visual system, the kid needs to see many different shapes, many different colors. Not TV, that's not real material. You need to see real three-dimensional stuff in your environment. So as many different shapes, as many different colors, movement and moving in the air, having to adapt your visual field. So that needs to be part of your child experience. Then the vestibular system, and that's where most kids are lacking. Because parents are lazy. Right? I understand. You know, I'm a parent now, and I know it's hard work. I mean, you work a full-time job. Maybe your spouse works a full-time job too. You come back home and you're tired. You don't want to necessarily play with your kid. You put him in his cradle and you just like let him fall asleep. But really, the vestibular system is developed when the kid has to adapt to rapidly changing positions in space. So when you do the airplane with your kid, you're moving him in the air. I actually do baby swings, like kettlebell swing with a baby with my kid, like changing position rapidly. And what you notice is at first, the baby will stay soft when you're changing position. When you are doing the airplane and you're moving left, right, the limbs just go limp and they move around haphazardly. But very quickly, when you move him around, the muscle tone changes, and now he adapts his body to the change in position. That is the development of the vestibular system, and that it needs to be emphasized because that is one of the main key to be able to move in a tri-dimensional space, rapidly adapting movement, being a great athlete overall. And then there's the proprioceptive system, mostly your hands and feet, that are the two main sensors when it comes to like being in a relationship with an opponent or with the field or with space or with a tool, for example. So once again, you need to touch as many different textures as possible, many different shapes as possible, and the kids' feet need to touch the floor as much as possible, not wearing like 5 layers of clothing because he's going to be cold. Yeah, but the feet need to be in contact with the floor to develop the proprioceptive system properly. So that these 3 systems are the foundation to the first step, the first element of natural skill, natural talent. And then the second one is creativity. And that is what separates the truly great athletes from the good physical specimen that lack that like genius skill, that genius athletic potential. And creativity is what separates the great from the rest. Creativity is the capacity in sports, to come up with new solutions to a problem you have never faced before, or that you have faced before, but you come up with an out-of-the-box solution that nobody expects. That is what creativity is. And creativity, instead of just following a system, for example, creativity is a combination of 3 elements. Once again, the number 3 is magical. The first element is a large accumulation of experience, and as varied of experience as possible. The more experience you have, the more of those experiences you have stored in your brain, and the better you are at retrieving that information and making connections with that information and the new situation you are facing to come up with a brand new innovative solution. That is the first step in creativity. Now, that requires a wide base of experience. If you only play ice hockey 12 months out of the year, you won't build it optimally. You need to be in as many different situations as possible, playing as many sports as possible. And even playing, if you want to play hockey 12 months out of the year, fine. But play hockey on different ice shapes. Or if you're playing soccer 12 months out of the year, play soccer on different types of field. Small fields, smaller balls, bigger balls, more opponents, less opponents, so that you always need to come up with new solutions. You accumulate a large baggage. Now, if we link that to neurotyping, the key neurotransmitter here is acetylcholine, because acetylcholine is basically the neurotransmitter responsible for the speed at which the information travels in your brain. So if you have more acetylcholine level, you can more easily store information, you can more easily retrieve it, and you can send it much faster to other portion of your brain to create that new solution. That's probably the reason why people with high acetylcholine are naturally more quote unquote skilled or gifted, because they can more easily transfer that information. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing that is required for creativity is a visceral need to experience everything. You need to be passionate about acquiring new experiences, because the more experiences you accumulate, the more information you will store in your brain, information that you can later use to create new solution, new creative, innovative solution, out of the box thinking. And the last thing is a willingness to experiment, or a willingness to take risks. Because it's one thing to come up with that cool new solution, but if you're not willing to take the risk of failing, or the willingness to go against your coach's will because he wants you to play the system, then you will never know if these experiences pan out, and you will never become creative. That's actually the reason why a lot of time the truly great athlete, those who are like great natural talent, are often labeled as uncoachable. Because when they're young, they don't apply the system, because when they're playing, they see a better solution in their mind. The problem is that most of the time it works. And because of that, the coaches, well, it's uncoachable, because, well, now the athlete will not listen to me because he's doing his own thing. Sure, but instead of trying to take an athlete who is 10 years old, and having played a structured system that even the pros have problems applying, why don't you just focus on having fun, playing, less rules, less structures, let the kid play to develop their creativity. Sure, it will not make you feel like the next coach of the year in the NFL, for example, because many coaches overcoach young kids because of their own need to feel like they are the next Belichick, the next Jackson, or the next Barry Trotz, for example. They want to believe that, hey, I have all the knowledge, I'm just stuck with these kids, I want to show up how great I am. But you know what? When you're working with young kids like under 14, just let them play, because that's when they need to develop their creativity. And that is the secret to greatness. They did a study in the Netherlands they looked at the soccer player for the national team, and then they compared them to the players for the second and third division. They wanted to see what was the main difference. Was it physical capacity? Was it body type? Was it experience in club play? And they found that there was no significant difference in body type, no significant difference in physical capacities, no significant differences in their background in club play from their very, very early age. The only difference they could find was the amount of unstructured play. The elite athletes, the best of the best, the naturally skilled athletes, had a lot more non-structured play during their childhood, meaning they might play backyard soccer, soccer in the street, using different shapes of field. Like instead of having 100 meters to work with, you might have 20. So you can't rely on the passing as much. You need to dribble a bit more. Maybe you didn't have money to buy a full-size ball. You had to rely on a coconut. Look at what the Brazilian did. The kids played in the street with anything they could get their hands on. They became motor geniuses when it comes to one-on-one play. And when they started playing like that on the international level, people were not ready for it, because they were all about the system. So really, it's all about doing the right things at the right time, and it all starts with the childhood, doing everything possible so that the child will have the best stimulation possible to develop all of their systems, and then allow your children to build his own creativity. At first, you will need to kind of direct the learning, because you need to present those stimulus to the kid, because he cannot yet walk, cannot yet move. But as soon as he can move in space, now it's up to him to experience new stuff, because you want to develop their curiosity, which is very important, the second factor, to develop creativity. And then as a parent, it's your job to allow your kid to be in as many different situations as possible, many different opportunities to accumulate training knowledge. So that's a big tangent here.
No, that's that's an awesome tangent. That is a huge answer. I was kind of writing things down along the way, like, and one of the things that immediately comes to mind too is, I mean, creativity is I feel like so underrated. And like you said, it really starts from that point where you're a child and under 14. And it was in the Little Book of Talent by Daniel Coyle. He was talking about one of the things that was really important in like these talent beds across the world was that the facilities to train were kind of crappy. Like, and maybe part of that was like, it says to you, you haven't made it yet. It's like Rocky 3. But I was thinking about, there was a book called Bounce where like this guy was like the fastest ping pong player in the world or something. Like he was out of the UK, and he grew up playing where he had to have his back against the wall. There was so little space, like his back was against the wall, and he just had to deal with it and move faster. And
exactly, I mean, and that's exactly what I mean. You adapt it to a different types of circumstances, and develop his own strategies, his own idiosyncrasies that made him special. And the more of these situations you have, the better. Now the problem is that we are, as parents, as coaches, we have two enemies when it comes to the development of our children. The first one is the reason why people underestimate the importance of creativity is that creativity cannot be taught. You cannot coach it. Okay, it's something that you develop through your own experience. So coaches, as I mentioned earlier, they want to feel important. They want to feel like, hey, I deserve to be the top. So instead of thinking about the kid, they think about themselves. So they underplay the value of creativity because they want to overemphasize their importance in teaching the skills, teaching the system. So that's the first thing. The second reason why we underestimate creativity is that it's hard to quantify it. I mean, you need to be able to assess it. You need to be able to find the best ways to stimulate it. And it's hard work for the parent, and it's hard work for the kid. And you need to be able to put yourself out there, and you need to go against the grain. I mean, just like look in sports now, what you have is they have sports camp, football camps that have you play football 12 months out of the year because they want your money. If you want your kids to be better, well, I'm going to go send him to quarterback school at 8 years old. And now it's like mandatory. Here in Canada, we have hockey schools. Like in the summer, kids will go to a 3 week skating school. Then it's going to be 3 weeks like defense school. So it's just to make their money. And then we have examples like Tiger Woods. Okay, Tiger Woods has done more to destroy children's sport than any human being ever by being great despite early specialization. Okay, so every time now, if I go up to a parent and I'll tell him, well, you know what, you shouldn't have your kid play hockey 12 months out of the year when he's 6. You shouldn't do all of these training camps. You should do other sports. You will always reply, yeah, but Tiger Woods started playing at 3 and he only played golf and he became the greatest player in the world. How can you argue that? Because it's true. However, look at the sport he's playing. In golf, you're not interacting with other players. You don't interact with opponents. You don't interact with suddenly changing situation. You don't have to create on the spot strategies in a millisecond. You don't have to react. You can plan every shot. You can think it through. It's just basically applying a simple motor pattern. So sports like golf, sports like gymnastics, sports like figure skating, of course, early specialization can work because it's only about technique and just repeating a routine, repeating a movement, repeating your skill on the apparatus, for example. That can work. That doesn't mean it makes balanced individuals. But from a sports perspective, sure, it can work. But you cannot apply the same logic to football. You cannot apply the same logic to basketball, to hockey, to any other sports where you are playing against an opponent. Okay, look at the Clemson team that won the national championship. More than 80% of their players were 2 sports athletes or more in high school. Look at most of how many NFL superstars were at least 2 sports stars. Most of them. Okay, So to me, when you play team sports, when you play sports where you need that creativity, when you need that talent, specialization is the enemy of performance. Sadly, we are fighting against the big business because it's easy to make money from parents who are eager to see their kid become stars at 12 years of age. I remember, okay, when I started training athletes, right, I was coaching hockey players and figure skaters. And among the skaters I was working with were two national champions, junior and senior. And one of the youngest skaters, I think she was 6 or 7 because we had kids of all ages. And her mother actually hired me to train her in a gym 2 more times per week. She was 6 or 7. And she was already skating with the team like 12 hours a week. And her mother was renting a coach and the arena for a few hours every weekend so that she can practice even more. So do you know what I did with the girl? I said, okay, I'm going to take the contract. I'm going to train her, but you cannot be in the room. Again, well, that was like 15 years ago. I'm not sure if in 2019 they would let a male coach be alone with a female skater of 6 years old alone in the gym, but at the time it worked. And I had her tell me about her day for an hour. And then we just played. Because there's literally nothing more stupid than having a 6-year-old kid who's already skating more than 15 hours a week, already doing some training with the team once a week, training 2 more days a week. It just didn't make sense. I mean, if you want to kill a kid's motivation to train and a motivation to excel at anything in life, because the message you're telling her, sure, it's important to work hard, but she will learn to hate anything that she first loved. And that is something that a child cannot live with. You need to foster passion in your kid. They need to become passionate about a sport. And if you play a sport 12 months out of the year, sure, some people might keep that passion up. But in most cases, you need to miss it. If you don't play, when I played football, and we didn't play for like 8 months, I couldn't wait to put the shoulder pads on and hit somebody, dude. I just couldn't wait for it. And when the football season was over, I couldn't wait to play baseball. And that's like, I was eager to play. I had rekindled motivation. But if I had to play football 12 months out of the year, I would completely lose interest. It would become a job, not a passion.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, and you being a 2A, do you think that plays into it too, like the athletes with higher novelty as well?
Absolutely. Of course, some people naturally need or want more novelty, but it could be like the chicken and the egg thing, right? Because the type 1A, for example, type 1A doesn't have great motor skill. They don't learn as fast as the 1B. They are super competitive, super driven, very passionate, but they don't want as much variation. They can stick to the same exercises for a long time as long as they see the potential to get stronger. They don't need to do many different sports, or they don't want to. But are they like that because during their childhood they were not exposed to situations that allowed them to build their acetylcholinergic system? So they were left with, maybe they are dopamine dominant, super sensitive, but they never fully developed their acetylcholinergic system, or not as efficiently as the 1B. And because of that, they became 1A. Or are they 1A and therefore they were not attracted to playing many sports when they were younger? So it's kind of a hard question to answer. I think it's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, a little bit of chicken. Those chicken and the egg ones always are. As you were talking, it's funny. Sometimes I think about how I came to be the athlete I came to be. I try to get out of the weight room and play sports as much as the situation presents it to me, just to kind of like stay in touch with that side of myself. I was a basketball and track, and I've been playing basketball about the middle of the day with a WNBA player and then a practice player for the basketball team, and I get my butt kicked, man. Like, I mean, it's like, it's really bad. And I try hard, and it just makes me realize as I'm playing, like, I am just a step slower with opening and closing feedback loops and tracking things, even though I'm a great athlete. And even when I was playing, it was like, I was okay with, I was a decent shooter because I just practiced it a ton. but I just think I missed that variety of ball sports in my younger years. Like I played playground games and tag and chasing, and I was good at reacting to a person, but I just don't think I played enough ball sports before I was like 6 or 7. I think that was it for me. I think that was a big difference maker.
You probably had very good visual development, very good vestibular development, which gave you that motor skill. But maybe you were lagging in the proprioceptive element, especially with your hands when you were younger, giving you a little bit less skill in the ball sports.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I should have been like Andre Agassi in his crib or whatever when they were like,
Yeah.
that would have fixed it all for me. I mean, I'm glad I found track. I think that's why I found track, because like, that's just where I was headed, because I couldn't keep up with the ball sports. It just wasn't. I had to work so much harder to keep up, and it was usually physicality that kept me in the game, but it was only going to take me so far.
You know what? It's interesting you mentioned basketball, because if there's one sport that really exemplifies what I mean by the importance of creativity, it's basketball. I mean, these kids, I would venture as far as to say that 75% of their playing time when they're young, it's in backyard basketball, or it's not in structured practice. Most of them play basketball like 2-on-2, 3-on-3, half court, like with limited rules, different strategies, no structure, with their friends, but that's how you develop creativity. That's how you develop creativity. You can be a very good, highly skilled player, skill in a sense of having good body control, having a good shot, knowing what to do technically and tactically, but like missing that one element that makes you a superstar, that makes you LeBron James, that makes you Michael Jordan, that creativity that comes with unstructured play.
Oh yeah, that stuff is so huge, and I've learned a lot about that from talking with Jeremy Frisch as well, who's been on this show, and just like yeah, like nothing like kind of kills me more too than seeing like coaches working with young athletes like 8, 9, 10, and they're just over coaching everything, and they're just not letting them play and solve the problem, and it's like these kids are good at solving problems, like they that's the human brain works pretty well, and no, I totally agree. It's like it's almost like we have to put our own egos as coaches aside when we know we're in that situation where we just need to let the kids do their thing and develop.
Absolutely. If you want to do something for kids, like make sure that they have a great first 2 years of their life. It's funny because I don't know how it is like with the sports scene in the U.S., but if we look here in ice hockey, especially, ice hockey is like really ugly. You have parents that would go to their kids game, like their kids are like 8 years old, and the parents will scream at the referees, will scream at the coach, like using profanities and stuff like that. Play my kid, put him on the penalty kill, put him on the power play. My kid's good. You know what? Your kid sucks, and it's your fault, because when he was 1, when he was 6 months old, when he was 2, you would come home from work, and instead of, you were tired, I understand, but instead of spending some time with his kid, stimulating him, you put him on a cradle, and when he started screaming, what did you do? You put him in front of a flat screen TV. Mm-hmm. Why? Because when you put a kid in front of a TV, it's magic. He stops crying. You know why? Because any modern screen, okay, like a flat screen TV, like a computer, like a tablet, like a iPhone, a smartphone, it projects images by using blue light. And blue light is very stimulatory on the dopaminergic receptors. So it creates a huge dopamine stimulation, produces a huge pleasure sensation. That's why these iPhones, these tablets, these flat screen TVs are so addictive. But here's the problem. When you put a young kid in front of a flat screen TV, because that's the only type of TVs we have left. When you put a kid in front of a flat screen TV that emits blue light, it creates a stimulation on the still developing dopaminergic receptors that is way too strong for their dopaminergic receptors to handle. What happens to a receptor when it receives a stimulation that is excessive? That's actually a question.
Oh, what happens to dopamine, the receptor when it's excessive?
if a receptor like dopaminergic receptors, adrenergic receptors, is overly stimulated way too much compared to what it can handle, what will be the reaction of the body?
Oh, does it lose its sensitivity to dopamine over time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you put a kid in front of a flat screen TV, the dopamine stimulation from the blue light is way, way, way too much for what the brain can handle, the kid's brain can handle, and it could actually permanently desensitize the dopaminergic receptors. And that might actually be one of the reasons why the modern kids are unmotivated or seen as unmotivated, lazy, no motivation, no confidence, no drive, because they basically created a situation where they are basically dopamine less. So they become overly reliant on adrenaline. And what happens when that happens is then they are open to like crazy behavior, misbehaving, attention deficit disorder. Can also lead to drug use, several stimulant use, stuff like that. But if basically we understand that the best athletes in the world, those who are the most competitive athletes, especially in strength and power sports, are very sensitive to dopamine. Okay, those who are the best under pressure, those who are the most competitive, those who are the most driven, those who are very confident, well, they have a very high sensitivity to dopamine. So by putting your kid in front of a TV before he is 2, you are actually killing his chances of being a great athlete. So that is literally the worst thing you can do as a parent.
Yeah.
So your kid sucks, and it's your fault because you were too lazy to, instead of trying to calm your kid down when he was crying. By the way, when the development of the serotonergic system is actually dependent on the reassuring of the parent when the kid's crying. When a kid cries and you calm him down, that actually contributes greatly to the development of the serotonergic system. So if you don't, if instead of like cradling your kid in your arms or trying to calm him down when he's crying, you put him in front of a TV, you're actually burning your dopamine receptors and you are probably underdeveloping your serotonergic system. Not a great mix if you want to be a highly competitive athlete.
That is crazy stuff.
Why do you think we have kids who are 6 years old, and they suffer from anxiety problem? They suffer from clinical depression. How can a 6-year-old suffer from anxiety and depression? What will it be like when they have rent to pay, when they have a family on their own? Dude, they're not going to go far. But how could a kid that young have anxiety, a real anxiety problem, and depression? It can only be problem with dopamine and serotonin. Your kid sucks, and it's your fault.
Yeah, I love that title. That's gonna be a bestseller for sure.
Like, put a bleep during the podcast. Someone is gonna steal the title.
Yeah, no, I could do that. Yeah, I'll try. I will try.
No.
It's intellectual. I think it's intellectual property since it's out there. I'm not sure, but
hey, all right.
That is awesome. I read a book before my daughter was born. She's 2.5 now, and it was called like Brain Rules for Baby, and it was talking about it was talking about no screens until age 3. I was so gung ho on it too. I just remember the first time me and my wife were at our wits' end when my daughter was about like 1.5 or somewhere in there, and we're like, fine, just let her watch. I don't even know what it is, but whatever it is on YouTube that she likes. And literally the second like her eyes hit that screen, it's like a zombie. It's like like it's crazy. It's like
people dilate. It's a
yeah, and so
same reaction as if you're suddenly taking speed.
Yeah, it is. It's totally different. And then like, usually my daughter loves to go to the park, but if like if she's watching something and it's like, hey, you want to go to the park? She's like, I'm like, no, you're going to the park right now. So, it's cool to hear the neurological aspects of all that and why that, the exact why that's important. What you're saying too, it fits so well. I did an interview with Dr. Tommy John Alex Lee like a month ago, and Dr. Tommy John was talking about the 3 S's that kind of really kill our children's development, which is shoes, screens, and swaddling. And when you were talking about moving, I was thinking about swaddling, and it's like my kids hated. I don't want to. I'm trying not to derail us into what I do with my kids, but like my kids just hated getting swaddled. So we eventually gave it up. We're like, all right, fine, just we'll put you in a blanket and hope you don't tie yourself up in it too bad or something. It's just like, and same with shoes. My daughter goes to the park and she hates wearing her shoes, even if it's cold. She's like, I want to take my shoes off. I'm like, yeah, fine. So it's really, really cool thing. It's like, I don't want to use this show to talk about my kids
when
forever.
more than one smart people say the same thing and they come from completely different fields, normally it's because it's the truth.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Well, that is awesome. And I think that, again, it's like you can't, it's so important for people to see that, because there's only so much making up for that you can do once the athlete hits maturity. It's like, it's such the process is so important. So I did want to get into a little bit in terms of some of the other training and performance questions that I had. And one of which was just recent developments in the world of neurotyping. Is there anything since we last talked, or since you've really rolled out the system, that you've been discovering or thinking about or looking at in a new light as we go through, or you go through the process?
Well, actually, I completely reshot the Neuro-typing online seminar. I reshot it last week, and it's going to be in 3 parts. And of course, those who already purchased the first edition will have like a massive discount, because there's like 25-30% new material, but it doesn't warrant like paying the full price for it. But we shot at everything because there are some evolutions. I think the main one is, of course, the way I explain it, because I've been teaching that seminar so often now that I know what is harder to understand. But the main difference in the system itself is the teaching of the role of glutamate. Because, we talked about like the type 1 being dopamine dominant, so very sensitive to dopamine. The type 2 being more sensitive or more driven by adrenaline. The type 3 being more driven by a lack of serotonin or lack of inhibitors in general. But you know what? The adrenaline dominance, because it was based on the original Cloninger system with the type 1, type 2, type 3 dominances. But it never really made sense to me that the type 2B's main excitatory neurotransmitter was the type 2, what was adrenaline, because that wouldn't explain the highly emotional behavior, the drastic mood swings, the moodiness, the taking everything personal, but more importantly, like the amplified emotional response to everything. And that's where I started digging a lot more. And what I found, and it actually makes sense, because a type 2B's main characteristic is low GABA. That's why they have more social anxiety, for example, and they are more prone to choking under pressure, because GABA and serotonin, but GABA plays a big role in preventing athletes from choking under pressure. And 2Bs are the most prone to choking under pressure because they have low GABA. But with low GABA comes one thing. It's excessive glutamate. Because glutamate, another neurotransmitter that also plays an excitatory role in the nervous system, glutamate is what is used to produce GABA. So you convert glutamate into GABA by an enzyme called glutamate decarboxylase. So that enzyme will take glutamate and convert it to GABA. Now, 2Bs having low GABA can only mean that they suck at converting glutamate into GABA. Now, so I started reading more on glutamate, and lo and behold, it is what I would call the emotional amplifier. Glutamate increases the intensity of all your emotions, both good or bad. When you have something good happen to you, it's the best day of your life. When a little small bad thing happen is, God, I want to kill myself, okay? And that actually explains why people have like frequent mood swings. Like they are super happy 1 minute and then they want to open their veins up an hour later and seemingly nothing happened. And not surprisingly, excess glutamate has been linked to bipolar disorders, among other brain disorders, because glutamate in excess is neurotoxic. So that's the first thing that gave me a clue that, okay, maybe type 2Bs, the main excitatory neurotransmitter is glutamate. So I started changing the way I explain the neurotransmitters, the neurotypes. Now what I do is I explain that each neurotype has one main excitatory neurotransmitter. and one main inhibitory neurotransmitter in most cases. So you would have one that amps you up, one that calms you down. Of course, you have all the neurotransmitter, but you have one system that is more efficient than the other. And when you look at the type 1A, for example, their main excitatory neurotransmitter is dopamine. Their main inhibitory neurotransmitter is GABA. GABA and serotonin, they are both calming the brain down. The way I could explain them, GABA is more like the parking brake and serotonin is the brake pedal. GABA is all or nothing. Serotonin is a lot more easily adjustable, right? So the 1A has a personality that's on or off. He won't change for anybody. He won't have shades of gray. He is black or white. So GABA. Whereas the type 1B, his main excitatory neurotransmitter is also dopamine, but his main inhibitory neurotransmitter is serotonin. So serotonin allows the 1B to be a lot more adjustable than the type 1A while still being confident, driven, competitive. As opposed to the type 2A, while the 2A is like a 1B light. Type 2A with decent acetylcholine can easily be mistaken for a 1B because he also has a lot more adjustability to his behavior. Now, so that's for 1A, 1B. The 2B, I'll get back to the 2A later. The 2B's main excitatory neurotransmitter now is glutamate. So he also has a good adrenaline sensitivity, moderate dopamine sensitivity, but very high amount of glutamate. Not just sensitivity, but he has a good amount because he cannot convert it efficiently into GABA, which is why he has low GABA. That's the main reason. And the type 3 will have adrenaline and dopamine as both co-excitatory neurotransmitter. That's why they are already always amped up. That's why their brain is always working on all cylinders. That's why they are always overthinking, overanalyzing everything, because they have dopamine and adrenaline always somewhat working. You know, they are resistant to it, but they have a high level of them, and they have very low level of serotonin and also low level of GABA. So that gave them their potential. Now, 2As normally have a pretty balanced level of all the neurotransmitter, except for their very strong adrenergic sensitivity. They have pretty much equal GABA, serotonin, acetylcholine, dopamine, glutamate, which is why they can actually be social chameleons. They have the neurological tools to become any profile they want in the short term. They cannot sustain it, but they can pretend to be it because they have the tools to act like another type. So that's the main difference I use in the teaching of the neurotypes. It's a bit more complex than that, but that gives a pretty good, easy to understand illustration of the concept. Now, the glutamate to me is the big thing, and it's probably why you see more and more and more and more 2Bs in our North American and our European societies. Why? Because our foods are full of glutamate. If you eat fast food, if you eat a Chinese buffet, if you eat frozen meals, if you drink commercial coffee, chances are you are ingesting good amounts of glutamate on a daily basis. Either in the direct form called MSG, monosodium glutamate, or because now it has a bad name for being neurotoxic, companies are using L-glutamic acid instead, which is readily converted into glutamate inside the body. So it does the same thing. Now you ask me, why would a fast food chain, why would a Chinese buffet, why would a commercial coffee place add glutamate in their foods? It's because glutamate is an emotional amplifier. So when you like something, you will love it with glutamate. Funny story. That was at least 18 years ago. Probably more than that. I was still living with my parents, so it has to be at least 23 years ago. And that's the first time I bought a George Foreman grill. The George Foreman grill just came out. So that tells you how old that story is. So when I bought my George Foreman grill, I couldn't wait to make some steak for myself. And I found McDonald's hamburgers recipe on the internet. Dude, I'm going to make the same burgers as McDonald's. And one of the ingredient was MSG, monosodium glutamate, because it's a food additive, but it's also a neurotransmitter. And now the problem is, because it's everywhere, that or now L-glutamic acid, because MSG has a bad name nowadays, you actually build up glutamate in your brain, and you probably lack the enzymes capable of converting it into GABA, and now you artificially become a 2B. You could have started as a 1B, a 1A, mostly a 1A. But if you overdo the glutamate thing, you could actually find yourself moving toward that 2B scale, because you actually chemically created a brain imbalance by increasing glutamate too much compared to GABA. On top of that, it does have many neurotoxic elements, as I mentioned. So that's one of the problems. But and also that's going off topic, but you know how I am. I'm somebody who always go at a big tangent. That's actually one of the reasons behind the popularity of the keto diet. Now I can hear your brain like tinkering. Why would the keto diet be related to excess glutamate in the diet or the increase in the number of 2Bs in the world? Here's why. Okay. The keto diet, some people will do it and they will suddenly feel like a new person, much less anxiety, sleeping better. So they stop overthinking. They stop taking everything personal. They are a lot more mellow, a lot more balanced. Life is good. And it's those people who become the preachers. Because, dude, I was feeling like total crap before. Just doing this keto diet, I feel like I've never felt before. These people were 2Bs, people who had too much glutamate. Even if they were not pure 2Bs, they had an excess glutamate, probably because of their diet or their incapacity to convert glutamate into GABA. Where does the keto diet come into play? Ketones, whether they are exogenous or endogenous ketones, they increase the activity of the glutamate decarboxylase enzyme, the enzyme responsible for converting glutamate into GABA. That enzyme is made more efficient when you have ketones in your body. So that means that the keto diet, because it produces ketones, you can take more of the glutamate you build up to convert it into GABA. So now you're solving two problems with one stone. You are decreasing the moodiness, the mood swings, the taking everything personal that glutamate brings you, the mental instability, and you increase GABA, which decreases your anxiety and makes you sleep better and respond better to stress. In that case, keto is a great dietary intervention. I'm not saying it's a great long-term solution, but to fix an excess glutamate problem, it works great, especially if you use supplemental vitamin B6, because it increases also the efficacy of the enzyme. But if you give the same keto diet to a type 3, someone who has low serotonin, the problem with the keto diet is that, yes, it increases GABA, but it also decreases serotonin. So if your problem was GABA because you have too much glutamate, perfect. If your problem is low serotonin, you're going to feel even worse. You're going to have problems concentrating, no motivation, no drive, super anxious, incapable of sleeping, can't shut your brain off. Because now you tanked the neurotransmitter that was already pretty low. The thing is that two important neurotransmitters, amino acids, tyrosine, tryptophan. Tyrosine is mostly used to produce dopamine. Tryptophan will produce serotonin. Now, when you eat both, and you do because every time you eat protein, you have both, you will always favor the transport of one of these two amino acids to make neurotransmitters. And it depends on what you ate. If I ate more proteins and fats, I will favor the absorption of tyrosine, thus increasing dopamine. If I had protein and carbs or more carbs, I would favor the absorption of tryptophan, favoring serotonin. So a low-carb diet that's rich in fat and protein will naturally maximize dopamine while decreasing serotonin. So that's why for some people, the keto can actually make you feel great. For some people, it will actually make you feel like shit and feel anxious. So it doesn't work for everybody. And just because it makes you feel amazing, don't try to convert everybody in your surrounding, because it will not work optimally brain-wise for everybody.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that with the keto diet and what you were saying with the two Bs. Like it makes perfect sense. And I've always heard like low carb diets are individualized, but I'd never really thought about why. Like I always knew it was, but so that it certainly makes the world of sense to me, and I think it can help us all with just that like and those people who do become like the preachers of it, like, oh, this is so good, and it totally makes sense how individualized it can be.
Yeah. And never underestimate how powerful something that makes you feel great can become for you. So you can very easily be seduced by something that completely changed the way you feel. I understand that. And if keto made you feel like a new person, dude, awesome. Okay. But it will not work universally for everybody. And I'm not talking about fat loss. I'm just talking about optimizing your brain, which is the cornerstone to everything. Because if you feel like crap, then you won't be able to sustain the diet in the first place. You won't be able to train hard. You won't be able to work hard. You have no quality of life. Your sex drive will go down. Not a good place to be. So it's all about optimizing brain. That's the first thing you need to establish.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. It's it all really starts at the level of the brain and how the athlete's responding to it. And it's I wanted to get with the 2B, you're talking about that, and I really wanted to get into a little bit of training stuff in terms of nuts and bolts. And one of the training constructs I've always really had a good time exploring was French contrast. And since I'm a 1B, it's like, this is the best ever. Everyone should, initially everyone should do this. Like, in my, before I found the neurotyping system, shoot, I even had, and I think I had intuitively found a few areas where like athletes wouldn't, like there's a 1A I trained, we just gotten him out of the French contrast just because it felt like the right thing to do. But I was putting French contrast on type 3s just without even, I was like, oh, you guys need to be more explosive. Okay, let's do this. And
yeah, the 1A can do it. I mean, it's not optimal, but it won't screw them over either. They will still get progress from it. The type 3 and the type 2Bs might not be optimal before. The type 1A, 1B, and 2As, it can work pretty well.
Yeah, with the contrast, I was curious because I was going through in your programs and the ideas that you have for like 2Bs and 3s. What's and let's say this is for athletes who maybe if you're a 2B or 3, maybe you're a middle distance runner in track and field or a middle distance swimmer or team sport player. What and you're trying to come up with some sort of complex or contrast for these athletes.
Yeah.
How does that change the game?
Well, first understand that the programs that are being sold on my website are for body composition. So they are extremely different than our program for athletes. It's not even remotely in the same ballpark. It's the same philosophy in that, okay, that person can do more explosive work, can do more mind muscle work, can do more volume, whatever. But it's just a caveat. Now, as far as complexes are concerned, depending on a neurotype and what you're trying to accomplish, then you will have different types. So for example, for a type 3, you probably will go, the way I would do it is normally the second exercise in a contrast is something that you should be comfortable with, something that you're good at, something that decreases stress level. So that's why for you, the French contrast works great. Now, for a type 3, for example, it would be more a matter of like doing a strength exercise along with a resistance exercise. So we could do, for example, for legs, could do a squat. Then it could be, for example, a prowler push, not sprinting, but more than walking speed, if you catch my drift, but for a fairly long duration, like 60 to 70 seconds. More importantly, it would be the exercise selection. For a type 3, you want to go with exercises with the least amount of either technical difficulty, type 2Bs and 3s. You want the least amount of technical difficulty or something that is close to what they are doing in their sport. So if you're working with a swimmer, you could actually do a contrast of chin-ups and swimming. That could actually work pretty well. Or if you are a runner, it could be front squats and 400-meter sprint, for example. It's close to your motor skill, doesn't create too much stress. So when you understand what you're good at and what your brain is supposed to do, and you put something close to that in the second exercise, that's going to work better. Now, with a type 1B, you can actually use very general exercises. They don't even have to be sport specific to read the most effect, because the more acetylcholine you have, the more transfer you're going to have from one skill to the other. The reason for that is what I explained earlier. When you have more acetylcholine, and the type 1B and the type 2As are those who have the most acetylcholine, when you have more acetylcholine, you can retrieve, store information easier, but more importantly, you can transfer that information to other parts of the brain much faster, so they have time to come up with a new motor solution before the opportunity is over. So that's why they can very easily transfer motor skill. They can go to their experience, then they can create a solution and transfer that fast enough so that there won't be a lag in the execution of the movement. It won't feel odd. It's like when someone doesn't have that capacity, when someone's like programming or speed in the brain is slower, that's when they do a new exercise and it just feels off. You feel like, okay, it doesn't feel natural. That's because the speed of transfer from one skill or the solution you created is just not fast enough. And there's a lag between the execution and the proper programming and ingraining of the new motor pattern. Whereas someone who has a lot of acetylcholine can do that very, very fast. By the way, one thing I want to clear out, I often use, and that's one other thing I change in the teaching of the neurotyping system. There is no such thing as multitasking. Okay, one of the key points to know if you are a 1B or a 2A, if you have high acetylcholine rather, is if you can multitask. In reality, it is absolutely impossible to multitask. The brain cannot do two things at once. It can only do one task at a time. However, you can perceive to be multitasking if you have a lot of acetylcholine, because now the information can move really, really fast in your brain, allowing you to switch from one task to the other extremely rapidly, so fast that you can have the impression that you're doing both at the exact same time. The less acetylcholine you have, the slower the information goes in your brain, the less you can switch from one activity to the other. So you don't have the illusion of that multitasking. But it's semantics, but it still feels like multitasking. I just want to be precise, because if there are neuroscientists listening and they say, oh, you can't multitask, and I don't want to look like an idiot, because I said, well, you need to be multitasking if you're a 1B, for example.
That's awesome. No, I totally get that. Yeah, like I mean, you can't, I mean, the only example I could think of doing two things is, once is that president who could write with both hands at the same time, or whatever it was. Yeah. Like I definitely can't. I totally agree there. And so a 1B or someone with high acetylcholine, like you
was he actually like writing, or it was just like, maybe he was rehearsing? If he rehearsed it before, it becomes only one gesture. You're just doing two different things with both hands. It's like if I'm throwing a baseball, I mean, both sides are working, but they're doing two different things.
Exactly.
So that can be a learn. It's like one skill, and in that one skill, you're doing two different things with both hands. So that could actually be a learn, but you wouldn't be able to think about, I want to write something. It needs to be rehearsed before you can actually do it.
No, I'm glad you stopped me there, actually, because that makes total sense. Like, because how could you'd have to have two brains to do that.
But it's a great parlor trick, though.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I'm sure it probably helped him get the presidency in some way.
If you want to convince someone of your intellectual superiority, just do that. I mean, it would be worth practicing it just to be able to do that.
That is the ultimate one-upper. Like, I can't think of too many things that could one-up that. Like, oh, look what I can do. That's pretty impressive. I was asking with the acetylcholine, the French contrast, like. And in that, and I really like the idea of, because I was going to get to this as well in training like 2Bs and 3s in the weight room who have weight limits for their sport. I really like how you said you could mix that with an endurance base of the sport skill. And it seems like that would be really good for the sensitivity as well. Like you get a little fatigue in the pull-ups, and now you feel the fatigue in the water. Like, and how has
Well,
it changed
actually,
things? Or
if you want to improve the mind-muscle connection, that's a great way, provided that you don't create too much fatigue in the target muscle, because that's the principle of pre-fatigue. Pre-fatigue, most people do it wrong. Okay, the purpose of pre-fatigue is not so much to build muscle, but to improve the mind-muscle connection with the key muscle in the exercise, maybe one that you're not activating properly. And it works by pre-activating a muscle with an isolation exercise, or an exercise where you can feel that muscle work better, and that will increase the sensitivity of the neuromuscular junction. So basically your muscles become more reactive to the neural impulse. Now, if you do that, but you train the muscle to failure, then it will have the reverse effect, because now the muscle is so tired that your body needs to rely on other muscle to get the job done, and you actually learn to use the opposite muscle. But if you create just enough stimulation to sensitize the neuromuscular junction, and then you get a little rest, it does not detract from the performance of the muscle. You don't learn to rely on other muscle groups, but now you can recruit that muscle better, both by feeling it better. So from a technical perspective, it helps you do better technique because you're feeling what you're doing a lot better. But it also actually, from a physiological standpoint, increase the contractile strength of the muscle for a brief period. So that would be the purpose. But from also a strength transfer point of view, if you combine a lifting exercise with a sport exercise, especially with people who have low skill transfer, that could actually help them transfer the gains from the weight room to sport performance a lot better. I mean, a 1B probably won't have that problem because they have great motor skill transfer, but take a 2B, for example, or a 2A with low acetylcholine, or 1A. Then if you take a 1A, you can get strong as hell, but it takes him forever to learn to transfer that skill into the sport skill. But if you do a squat, then you rest maybe 30, 45 seconds, and then you do a short sprint, over time, as you're getting stronger, you are also learning to apply that strength in the sprinting movement. So for someone with low skill transfer, it could be a very, very powerful tool.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, and where I got the pre-fatigue idea and the skill, and maybe there's a little misinterpretation either on my end or their end, but it was Franz Bosch was talking about this, referring, and he led me to this experiment that Paul Venner did, who has the aqua bags, and it was I think his master's thesis research at St. Mary's, and it was on baseball players. And half of the group would do like their weight training, and I think it was just sets of 10, and that's probably the really important variable is what was the sets, and I want to say it was like a 2 or 3 sets of 10. I'm not 100% sure, but it was somewhere in that ballpark. And one group did the weight training and then did hitting practice, or did hitting practice and then the weight training, and one group intermixed the hitting or with the weight training, so they would do a set of weights and do a set of hitting, and the group that intermixed it improved their bat speed significantly. And they were talking about fatigue, like the idea of, oh, you fatigued it, so the body has to find new fibers. But with what you're saying, it's really more just it increases the sensory. Like it's, I guess, unless you're really taking that set of 10 to the house like every time.
Well, you can increase sensitivity, or you can also decrease protective inhibition, and that's something that people don't understand. Okay, and that's gonna sound weird because, okay, how can weakening a muscle make that muscle faster? Well, if your muscles are so strong and you're naturally explosive, your body can protect itself by making you decelerate sooner into the movement. Okay, let's say you're not jumping, but let's say you're bench pressing. Okay, let's use the bench press, and you have only the empty barbell, and you're trying to lift it as explosively as humanly possible. Well, if you're super explosive, you can produce so much speed from that first part of the movement that as soon as the first quarter is done, subconsciously, the brain starts to decelerate the bar. so you don't have a ballistic shock that is too intense at the end of the range of motion. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So if I were to pre-fatigue my chest and my triceps with regular bodybuilding training, and then at the end of my session, I would ask you, go to the empty bar, do the most explosive bench press you can with the empty barbell. In many cases, especially in explosive athletes, the speed, the top speed, not the top acceleration, but the top speed would probably be higher with the barbell when it wasn't at the end of the workout. Because the muscles being slightly weaker, the body allowed you subconsciously to accelerate for a longer part of the range of motion, because now it did not fear hurting yourself as much. So you had a longer portion to accelerate, resulting in a higher top speed, even though you have a lower acceleration. Top acceleration, you have a higher velocity, okay? So if you look at bat speed, you could have the same thing at play, because now the body feels safer because, hey, I did not produce as much initial acceleration. I'm safe. I can accelerate for longer, but the longer period of acceleration leads to a higher bat speed.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And one of the, I mean, where I'm headed with a lot of things is just how to use weightlifting as a motor learning enhancer. You know, like where it can go beyond just being in the weight room. And that's
one guy you could interview about that is Stephen Jones.
Yeah, he's been on the show before. Actually, I need to get him back. He does awesome stuff. Yeah, with cricket and fast pitch.
I actually trained him when he was younger.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When he was still playing both cricket and rugby, I trained him, and we still have a great working relationship again. So he's big into the neurotyping himself. He wants to apply it to all the cricket players in India.
Oh yeah, Stefan is a motor learning genius, and I should probably get in contact with him here soon and brainstorm. And I was gonna say too, like with the 2Bs, like we were talking 2Bs, and this is something that I just think is interesting. Like 2Bs in a sport where body weight is fixed, or should be. You know, if you gain mass, it could be bad. Like if you're a middle distance track or swimmer or wrestling or whatever. What considerations are you, or what main objectives are you now making in the weight room to give them what they need from a brain perspective, a prep perspective, but then also make sure that they're not, especially because they're like mass, you know, they're volume people and sensation people, but you don't want to mess them up, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Weirdly enough, with them, I use concurrent training. So for example, they would do, let's say for example, the A1, A2 exercises, okay? Then after that, we would do a bout of hard intervals. Then we would do the B1, B2, and then do a bout of very hard intervals, maybe 5, 6, maybe 7 minutes in the lactate zone, because they really do well on that lactic acid. And then they would do C1, C2, and they would finish with a bout of intervals. I would probably vary the interval type, various phases of the workout. So what that will do first, it keep the 2Bs actually love that lactic acid feeling, and they need external cues or external feedback that they're doing a great job. So looking at that puddle of sweat at the bottom of the apparatus or the prowler or whatever, it keeps them motivated. That will allow them to keep their insulin sensitivity up, which tends to be lower because of their low GABA. It will also help them stay much leaner, thus making weight. And it will allow them to build a little bit of muscle without exceeding their weight, but they still get that great mind-muscle feeling. Now, as far as training is concerned, from a parameter perspective, what I focus on is simply using a slower eccentric most of the time. But the way I train athletes, here's just to give you a brief overview of the way I plan training programs for athletes. I always, with athletes, I train the whole body. I sometimes in some phases I will use upper, lower, but most of the time it's whole body every workout. And we normally have 3 main workouts per week and 1 extra session. The 3 main workouts are for the whole body, but they will focus on a different contraction type. So Monday could be eccentric, Wednesday could be isometric, and Friday could be concentric. And of course, depending on the training phase, the method being used will be different. So for example, during the first phase, we might do like super slow eccentric because it's longer duration. So maybe between 3 and 5 reps with an 8 to 10 seconds eccentric and an explosive concentric, for example. During the second phase, instead of using a super slow eccentric, we might go with a slow eccentric but with a weight releaser. So adding an extra 10 to 20% to the barbell, lowering in 5 seconds, and then lifting explosively with the lighter weight. And then in the third phase, which would be the realization, we would use over-speed eccentrics. So either using elastic bands and the fastest eccentric you can to accumulate potential energy in the tendons by using kinetic energy accumulation, or using plyometrics, using the drop and catch method. So basically high speed eccentric. So you're going from volume to intense to high speed. The isometric would be the same thing. So you would start with let's say, for example, using isodynamic contrast. So I would hold the position of highest tension or a key position in the movement for 15 seconds. Then I would do, for example, 4 to 6 reps, something like that. The second week could be 20 seconds, third week 25 seconds. So I'm increasing time under tension by increasing the duration of the pre-fatigue isometric. Then the second phase, I would do regular reps, but with an isometric pause of 3 seconds on every repetition. So just to increase the isometric emphasis. And depending on the neurotype, the pause will be, because there will be different, some variations based on the neurotype. So for example, a 1B, even with a slow eccentric, I allow them to use the stretch reflex at the very bottom. So the last quarter of the range of motion will be very explosive. For example, for the isometric, for when there's a pause, the 1B will take it mid-range so that he can still use the stretch reflex, whereas a 1A will use it in the bottom, for example. And then during the last phase, the isometric would be ballistic isometric, so basically absorbing force. So it kind of like the drop and catch method, but sticking the landing. Like I'm throwing something at you and you need to absorb it and catch it hard and hold it with maximum tension for about 3 seconds. Could be, you see, depth landings from or depth landing push-up position, for example. And then the concentric, they would be a regular programming. So you could have, for example, 8, 6, 4 waves the first block. You could have 5, 6, 4, 2 waves for the second block, and you can have 3, 2, 1 wave for the last one. These are just examples. I use like 10,000 different loading methods, and depending on the neurotype, it would be different. And then the fourth day would depend on the phase. If it's earlier off season, it would be structural balance, correcting weaknesses, or technical movements, working on technique acquisition. During the second phase, it would be Olympic lifts from blocks, and the third phase would be Olympic lifts from the hang, for example. And of course, depending on the neurotype, it will change the level of difficulty, the type of Olympic lift. But that's just to give you a broad idea of what it looks like. And of course, the training methods and the loading schemes will change based on the neurotype.
Yeah, I with that 2B in particular, and you're talking about the eccentric protocol and the drop catches, and so well, a couple of questions with that. Well, one, so with that population, like a 2B who needs, or let's say a team sport 2B who really needs to get faster, how much of that type of fast work in the weight room can they really tolerate? If you're tasked with getting fast and you're 2B, what's your approach there?
One of the approach I really like, and I can't take credit because it's from Jay Schroeder of Evo UltraFit. Work with Adam Archuleta and many other top players. And it's a method that I use myself in my own training, and I love it. And I think it's actually perfect for a type 2B because it is explosive, but it uses very, very light weight, and it does create muscle fatigue and burn. It's the drop and catch method. So for example, let's say I'm doing curls. I'm going to use curls because it's much easier to visualize for most people. So you will hold the top position of a curl, then you basically let go of the bar while very rapidly moving your arms down to the 90 degrees position so that the arms reach that 90-degree position while the bar is still in the air, and you have to catch it. And then as soon as you catch it, you lift it back up. A 2B does not have to lift it explosively at first. Just catching it hard will be enough to develop that explosive capacity. Now, here's the thing. The loading parameters are you do 10 seconds of work, 5 seconds of rest, and you do 10 sets. So the load would be very, very light. Like personally, okay, I don't have very strong biceps. That's never been my strong point. I will use a 20, 25 pound barbell. So that's really not heavy. When I do the movement for lateral raises, I will use 8 pounds. So it's really not heavy. One arm at a time, of course, for lateral raises. But for 10 seconds of work, you get probably, because you want quality, so you're probably going to do 6 or 7 reps. Then you rest for 5 seconds, then you do it again. So for 10 sets, that's actually a long time of retention. And oddly enough, you will get a pump from that, and you will get muscle fiber fatigue, and you will actually preferentially recruit the fast twitch fibers. So for a 1B who needs to be explosive, he will actually get the feeling he craves. He will get the rapid gains he wants, and it's not demanding on the nervous system, not too much, because the load is not heavy. Yes, you are amping up the nervous system, but in that case, it's much better than doing explosive lifts like Olympic lifts, like doing jump squats, stuff like that. But I think the secret with the type 2B is using the proper nutritional and supplementation protocol post-workout to shut down the brain, because food is your best ally to put your brain in the right state to perform. I'm going to give you an example. One of the bobsleigh guy I'm training, okay, just freak athlete, is, just to give you an example for the story, the past year his slowest 30-meter sprint was 3:77, which is fast. It's not like lightning fast, but it's fast. Well, you know numbers better than I do. So his worst was 3:81. Sorry about that. His worst in the past year was 3:81. For the whole year, he never ran slower than 3:81. So we're about 2 weeks before the training camp, and he needs to be fast if he is to make one of the first 2 teams. Now the cutoff to make the first selection process is to run at least 3:9. If you don't run 3:9, they don't even look at you for further test. So he never ran like slower than 3:81, so that's not a problem, right? So 2 weeks before, he takes the weekend off because he has something planned with his girlfriend. We normally always train at least once during the weekend. He doesn't take 2 days off in a row. He comes back to the track on Monday. He calls me up in panic. Chris, I just ran 3:93. Holy shit, 3:93. That's like more than 1/10 of a second slower than your slowest time of the year. 2 weeks before the cut, and he's freaking out, right? And he said, well, my muscles felt flat. I didn't feel them contracting. And also, of course, the first thing I'm thinking was maybe he was glycogen depleted, like flat muscle. He was sleepy. So I asked him, well, did you eat enough? Did you have enough carbs? He said, dude, I hate all the carbs. Like I went to town all weekend, right? Like piling the carbs on. Okay. So, and he didn't train. So now, okay, so describe exactly how you felt the morning of your training. Well, my muscles felt flat. Did they felt flat as in small, or like just no muscle tone? Oh, yeah. They felt like I had no muscle tone. Okay, that's different. And I felt unmotivated. I felt sleepy. I felt heavy. Okay, here's your problem. He's a 1B, and he has an abnormally high level of serotonin, like super high. So he can tolerate any amount of volume. It's crazy. And he actually has high dopamine plus high dopamine sensitivity, which is very rare. Anyway, so what happened is that by not training, by eating mostly carbs and crap, he actually decreased his dopamine. Remember, when you eat more carbs, you favor the absorption of tryptophan over tyrosine, so you increase serotonin more. He already has sky-high level of serotonin, even more so because we were in the middle of a deload, like a drastic decrease, a taper, I mean. So his serotonin was already super high, and he just ate so many carbs, it increased it so high that it was now impossible for him to get his nervous system amped up, because his inhibitory neurotransmitter were a lot higher than his excitatory ones. So that's why the muscle tone was low, because it just couldn't, because muscle tone is nothing more than a partial neurological activation of the muscle. So he didn't even have the neurological activation to keep that muscle hard. And that's why he was not motivated. So he felt lazy because serotonin was super high, dopamine was super low. So I told him, okay, relax, just have protein, like just have proteins and fat for your next meal, rest for 2 hours, chill at home, and then go sprint again. So he called me up and said, Chris, I just beat my PR on the loaded 20 meters. Yeah, because the first session actually amped up your dopamine. It was not enough to perform well during that session, not to overcome the serotonin, but by the second session, then it was back to your normal self. So nowadays, when he trains, we never have carbs before his workouts. So if we work out at 1, all the meals prior to 1 will be proteins and fat only. And then after the workout, that's where he will have his carbs to increase recovery. Now with a 2B, of course, if you want to increase GABA by decreasing glutamate, you could actually put him on a keto diet. But if he is on a keto diet, it will take a few weeks until he can do neurological work, because it will take a few weeks to really increase that conversion of glutamate into GABA, because you need to increase the circulating ketones. But you could actually use supplements to increase GABA level post-workout. So you could use, valerian roots, you could use vitamin B6, you can use gochu kola, you can use, but GABA itself can actually be effective, even though some studies have shown that it is not properly absorbed. I find personally it actually works. CDB oil would actually work very well in that case to decrease anxiety, which is nothing more than the brain firing too fast. Magnesium would help to dislocate adrenaline from the adrenergic receptors. So many different, or by the way, but with a 2B, don't use glycine. I often recommend glycine because I think it's a superb product. Glycine is an amino acid that is also a neurological inhibitor. It works a lot like GABA on the nervous system. It calms it down. On top of that, it activates mTOR, which increases protein synthesis. So I use it post-workout with most of the athletes I work with, or most of my clients, because it shuts down the brain, decreasing cortisol, decreasing the chance of nervous fatigue, and also increase protein synthesis. But with a type 2B, especially a type 2B who still has high glutamate, glycine become an excitatory neurotransmitter. The excess glutamate changes the function of glycine. So if you give glycine to a type 2B, it will actually impair his recovery. You want to go with magnesium, you want to go with valerian root, you want to use GABA itself, or any supplement that can increase GABA. Like phenibut is great at that. CDB oil can also help decrease anxiety, even though it works slightly better with people with serotonin issues, but it can still help those with GABA issues. By the way, most of the time, if someone has GABA issues and he has been having those for a while, you need to fix serotonin before fixing GABA. And that's really important.
It's interesting. It makes me think of something like the NFL Combine. Like if your nutrition was if too much carbs or something leading up to that, if there was no thought of that, and it adversely affected you, that would be really detrimental. And
it could cost you millions of dollars.
Yeah, that's what I mean. What do you think? I mean, you just said that the athlete. I mean, he ran 393 and then he shaved like a couple tenths off just by kind of getting.
After that, with the proper peaking procedures, he hit 375, which was his all-time best.
Okay, wow, it really is amazing. I mean, nutrition is an area that's probably been of all my areas of expertise is probably my most lacking. But as soon as you say, oh yeah, you're going to run this much faster, or this is this important in peaking, and especially based on your neurology, it's like, okay, what does this do?
I'm the same way, dude. That's why I have a nutrition guy. Like Stefano Bay is my nutrition guy, he's my supplementation guy. And even when I was training bodybuilders, I just hate the nutrition portion. I hate it with a vengeance. I always eat like an asshole. I mean, I'm really not a good example for diet. It's just not a topic that interests me that much. But if we're talking about manipulating brain chemistry or manipulating performance, then it becomes interesting. So I won't talk to you about like ratios or recipes, but I will talk about timing though, because using nutrients to put you in a certain neurological state, that's in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that it takes something like that for me to really latch onto it as well. Yes. Christian, you kind of answered one of my questions, which was kind of general ideas for recovering from workouts with dopamine in mind. You had talked about a few supplements. Is there anything other like general principles or things that sweep across different neurotypes for how to recover better from a nutritional perspective?
If there's one supplement from a recovery perspective that any neurotype can benefit from, it would be lion's mane. Like lion's mane is first because it is involved in nerve regeneration. It decreases nervous system inflammation, brain inflammation, systemic inflammation. It increases the production of several neurotransmitter. It has dopaminergic effect. It has acetylcholinergic effect, and it also has anti-anxiety effect. So for any type, it will actually, for a type 1, it will help them stay motivated. It will help them prevent that crash from a decrease in dopamine. Since they love that neurologically intense training, it will help regenerate the nerves, recover from nervous system workouts. For a type 2B and type 3, it decreases anxiety, which is nothing more than the brain firing too fast, which will slow down the brain after a workout, increasing recovery, and also helping them sleep and just making them feel better overall. If I were to design a supplement line targeting the nervous system, it would be in the formulation for every neurotype. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I that's good stuff, and I like that there can be general things too, like no matter what anyone lines made. So that's it. Easy.
Well, that's the most general one, but vitamin B6 should be used by everybody. Vitamin in its like properly absorbed form, like pyridoxine or P5P. Everybody should use that because it is involved in the production. It's a cofactor in the production of pretty much every neurotransmitter. You just can't have optimized neurotransmitter function if you're vitamin B6 deficient. So that's another thing that most people should be taking. There are also supplements that many neurotype can use, like just simple good old tyrosine. Tyrosine will work great for 1A, 1B, 2As, and 2Bs pre-workout. However, they will need to take a downer after the session because it will amp them up too much. I wouldn't use it with a type 3 because it will make them anxious during the workout. But tyrosine, I actually use tyrosine as a test to know if someone has depleted dopamine or if it's resistance in the adrenergic receptors. So if someone is exhibiting signs of what we call CNS fatigue, by the way, CNS fatigue is not a thing. You don't fatigue the central nervous system, you fatigue neurotransmitters, or you create resistance in the receptors. So for example, the symptoms of what we often call CNS fatigue are lack of motivation, lack of drive, decrease in concentration, decrease in pleasure called anhedonia. You have decrease in sex drive, less willingness to do effort. You're lazy, mood swings. Now that can happen after a very intense workout, for example. Now, what it can actually be, it's not the fatigue of your brain. It's either that you depleted dopamine, or that your adrenergic receptors are now temporarily resistant to your own adrenaline. And both can happen for the same reason. If you overstimulated the sympathetic nervous system, if I produce too much adrenaline, you either keep the adrenaline connected to the adrenergic receptors for too long, or too much. In that case, the receptors would become resistant, and it will be a problem mostly with the type 2As like me. Or by producing so much adrenaline, you depleted your dopamine, because adrenaline is made from dopamine, which would hit mostly the 1A and the 1B. So the way you can test what is the issue is that when you feel like crap in the morning, take 7 to 10 grams of tyrosine on an empty stomach and note how you feel 30 minutes later. If you feel dramatically different, like I'm feeling like a new person, like $1,000,000, I'm happy again, then you know the problem is dopamine depletion, because a tyrosine increased dopamine back up to optimal level. If you feel a little bit better, but not that much, but it's still, you can still notice a difference, but like not night and day, it's probably a dopamine receptor resistance, because you didn't necessarily deplete your dopamine, but you didn't have enough to target your receptors, because now they're resistant. By increasing dopamine level, you can kind of compensate that, and you get a little bit better. If there's no change, then it's a desensitization of the adrenergic receptors, because even if you pile up dopamine, if you stop responding to your own adrenaline, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's really important. I feel like to know that stuff because I mean, for me personally, every time I go and to jump or lift or whatever, and like just the bar feels heavier, I just can't get just can't don't have that pop. You just kind of like, oh, I'm just overtrained. Like to know that there's more going on and to really know what's going, rather than you burnt out your CNS or whatever that term is.
In my life as a coach, and I've been coaching for 21 or 22 years. I can't remember. I'm getting old. I've seen two real cases of overtraining. Now, of course, when you work with swimmers, you're going to see more because the volume is horrible. It's not as bad as it was in the 90s and 80s, but it's still pretty out there. I've seen very, very few real cases of overtraining. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But for most people, it's simply a temporarily situation, like a depletion of a neurotransmitter, resistance of receptor. Maybe you have problems with overactive sympathetic nervous system due to excessive cortisol, because that's one thing, right? People misunderstand the connection between cortisol and the sympathetic nervous system. People think that, oh, I'm producing cortisol because I'm in sympathetic system, right? So I'm increasing adrenaline. My system, sympathetic nervous system is turned on, so I produce cortisol. It's the other way around. The cortisol is what puts you in that sympathetic mode. The cortisol is what increases adrenaline. Cortisol increases the conversion of noradrenaline into adrenaline to put you into that hyped up mode. Okay. Cortisol, people call it the stress hormone. That's really a misnomer. It should be called the readiness hormone. Cortisol puts your body in a state that it will be ready to face anything. It mobilizes stored energy, and it increases wakefulness and alertness, and it increases muscle contraction strength, it increases heart rate. How does it do those last two things, the wakefulness and alertness, as well as the heart contraction strength and blood flow? It does that by increasing adrenaline. So the cortisol, it increases energy mobilization so that you don't run out of fuel. It increases alertness so that you will be able to fight a tiger and see all the opportunities for battle and all the opportunity to win, for example, or be creative, be instinctive, think out of the box, be a bit more functional. It also increases muscle contraction strength and heart contraction strength, thus increasing blood flow to the muscle, increasing oxygen delivery, and helping you get rid of those metabolites that might limit performance. It also increases the contraction of your muscles, so you'll be stronger, better at fighting a tiger, of course. It shuts down the immune system, okay? Yeah, but isn't the immune system important for facing a stress? No, it's not. It's important to repair the damage caused by the stress. But while you're facing the stress, it's like sending more energy to the replicator and holodeck on the Star Trek Enterprise. When you're fighting, you want all the energy on the deflector shields. So the cortisol will decrease the activation of the immune system so that it has more resources for the defenses. When the stress is over, cortisol should go back down, immune system goes back online. Now you are in repair mode. The problem is that in modern society, cortisol stays elevated way too long, and you have problems repairing damage because the immune system, repairing muscle tissue, is dependent on the immune system. So that's what cortisol do, and that's why cortisol increases adrenaline, not the other way around. When you wake up in the morning without an alarm clock and you're ready to go without needing coffee, people say, well, it's because your cortisol is healthy. You had a cortisol spike that woke you up. No, the cortisol spike did not wake you up. The cortisol spike happened just before you woke up, creating an adrenaline spike that wakes you up and gives you energy. So what we need to understand from that is when you are in a situation where you're constantly overproducing cortisol, you are constantly converting adrenaline, noradrenaline into adrenaline, and by extension, risking depleting dopamine. That's the negative impact of overall stress on performance and recovery, especially neurological recovery.
Yeah, I like that idea of renaming cortisol. The readiness, it's the readiness hormone, not.
That's what it does. That's what it does. It does everything possible to make it easier for you to face enemy you might have to face.
Yeah, it's. I just really love learning about those ins and outs of exactly where the fatigue comes from, because it's just, if it hits you as general, it's like you just don't know where to go. It's just rest. There's so much more in the equation.
Dude, sometimes rest will make you perform worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're two, like you said, you're 1B who had the weekend to rest, several days in a row off, and what that does, and that's the same thing with me. I just had 3 days off myself recently here because I had some people were sick in my family and taking care of them, and busy weekend. And that first workout, it's like I dread it. Like I intentionally cannot go hard because I just know what's coming. So it's just like gotta ease back in. Hey, I got one more quick question for you here because I really was excited to ask you this. And that's the idea of along the lines of neurotyping and training, is that's training frequency. And I know like the 1B, the 1A, like the neurologically loaded athletes who have that crackling nervous system can handle they can handle training the nervous system more frequently. And I think about like, the Bulgarian weightlifters, and they're doing that. And I've personally had some very good luck as a 1B doing things like depth jumps every day. But I also wonder, is there a balance there? Because I know in some programs that you've written for 1B, and maybe these are more bodybuilding driven. In fact, they probably were. So I'll put that out. But where you might work the lower body twice and the upper body twice or something like that. Like, what are some general guidelines for high frequency training if you're going to do something like a lift a day or something like that?
That's a good question. But when we take, as you mentioned, the programs on the website are mostly like body composition, bodybuilding thing, dealing with people who don't do other type of activities outside of the gym, and for whom a suboptimal performance one day sometime it's not that. For an athlete, my mentality is that you need to have your nervous system as close to 100% as possible at every session, because when your nervous system is not close to 100, if it's like 75, 80, first of all, you're just going to build up more fatigue, but your performance will be bad. Even if the numbers are actually pretty good, there will be some compensatory mechanisms happening. Your risk of injury increases, motivation decreases, so a lot of bad things can happen. So with a bodybuilder, it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you don't like overtrain, not overtrain, but do way too much, and then from week to week you just get worse and worse and worse. That's too much. But if for one day out of the week, maybe even 2 out of 5, you're not your regular self, it won't matter that much as compared to an athlete. Now, that's why for an athlete, I never, except for some like exceptions, I never have more than 4 lifting workouts a week. And most of the time, it's only 3 of those workouts are intense session. The other one is more like a structural balance, correcting your weaknesses, maybe improving mobility, stuff like that. But it's only 3 workouts, and the volume is fairly low. That's the thing, right? You cannot, and that's why I don't like, I'd like to sell more of the product on my website, but if you're an athlete, don't buy those programs, okay? Even though they have an athletic feel, they use athletic method for someone who wants to train like a bodybuilder. It's like the middle ground. But for an athlete, I use a minimalist approach. I use the least amount of volume to get the job done all the time. Now, as far as frequency is concerned, don't forget that athletes, they don't do just weight training. So they don't need to lift heavy or do an all-out workout every day. Like what I often do is kind of like what you did, is do like a neural charge session, like for 15, 10, 20 minutes, just a few explosive exercises on your quote unquote days off from lifting, just to keep the nervous system crackling. That works well as long as it's not at fatiguing level. But they don't need to go hard 6 days a week. They probably can survive it. Doesn't mean it's optimal for an athlete, especially since they are practicing their sport or doing other things than just lifting weights.
No, for sure. Yeah, or being in a Bulgarian training hall with the coach, like.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That is a different animal altogether. Yeah. That's Tiger Woods, all right?
Yes.
You cannot look at what Tiger Woods did and say, I'm going to use that model for everybody, right? There is one Tiger Woods, okay? Maybe a few like Korean or Japanese players like started at the same time and became decent players, but most of the guys who tried to do that ended up like with a lifetime psychiatrist or psychologist scheduling. It's just way too hard. So when you look at the Bulgarian system, it works through a natural selection process. I mean, they don't start out training 3 times a day, 6 days a week. It's a school system. You start lifters when they are what they call class 4 or even class 5, the lowest class. You're class 5. Then for each class, there's a weight class and a total you must reach. If you reach that total, you can move up to class 4, for example. While all the class 5 lifters, it's 3 workouts per week, for example. All the class 4 lifters, it's 4 workouts per week. All the class 3 lifters, it's 4 workouts per week, but one of these days is 2 a days. Then you move to the class 3 lifters, it's 4 workouts, but 2 a days. Then you move to the class 2, 5 days a week with 2 a days, and so on and so forth. And those who make it to the system that uses the extreme Bulgarian approach are the master of sports and the master of sports international class. And these guys have been through all the stepping stones. So at every level, we weed out those who can't tolerate that amount of volume. So the Bulgarian lifters are, for the most case, from what I'm seeing anyway, they are very sensitive to dopamine, have very high level of both GABA and serotonin, which is kind of unusual, and they probably have a fairly high amount of dopamine production even if they're sensitive. So they are extremely impossible to overtrain, neurologically speaking, and it's through a selection process. If 1,000 lifters enter the program, 1 will make it to the end. So you cannot apply the logic. And people say, well, I'm going to just tone down the Bulgarian system. Well, you can't do that. Okay, you either take it all or you don't take it at all, because it's a progression and it's meant to select those who are naturally designed to be weightlifters. It's not a system designed to build lifters. It's a system built to reveal lifters. That's different.
I like that. Not built, but to reveal. That's good. Yeah, it's a good synopsis. And that, yeah, Tiger Woods and Bulgarian system. I'm definitely linking those together. But great show today. Before we go, I did want to say there's a neurotyping survey on your website now. Do you want to tell us about that real quick?
Well, it's a questionnaire I developed with my father. My father, of course, was both a clinical psychologist. Then he became, he was also a college professor. His specialty was creating psychological assessments. And then he moved on to human resources. So his sole job was selecting personnel for big enterprises based on their psychological profile. So we designed that test together. So it helps you know if you're a type 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and type 3. Now, like all written assessment, it's not like a be-all, end-all, because it basically reveals what you think you are. That's the thing, because you might think, oh, yeah, I'm super talented. I learn new skills very easily. But you ask people around you, they're going to laugh at your face. So it basically is biased by your own perception of yourself. But if you are honest, it is a pretty good clue. Now, in about 8% out of 10, the answer will be pretty clear. But in 2 or 3 out of 10 people, we have 2 scores that are fairly equal, sometimes even 3 scores. When there are 3 scores, in my opinion, it's always a 2A, because it means that you are mimickers. You can be anybody depending on the situation. I'm working on a new one. I mean, I like this one for people who want to know which program to buy or which diet to buy, or get a general idea of this is how I should be training. I want to create one specifically for coaches that will be slightly different, because instead of testing for your neurotype, it will test for neurological balance, kind of like what the Braverman did. So it will tell you, okay, you are dopamine sensitive with high acetylcholine, high serotonin, middle GABA, low glutamate, for example. So it will give you a profile like that. And to me, for a coach, that is a lot more useful than just knowing, okay, you're a type 2A. because you could be a type 2A with high acetylcholine and high serotonin. So you could train almost exactly like a 1B, for example. So to me, knowing individual neurotransmitter, if you understand the system well, is a much better tool to train athletes.
Yeah, it sounds something that could be really insightful for a lot of people, especially with everything you've shared about the neurotransmitters on our show today. I think that sounds really cool how you created that, and I think it'll help a lot of people.
It's a show I'd like to listen to. It sounds really interesting. I mean, I was listening to us talk, and it sounded pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so. I'm excited to go back through it and make some show notes out of it and edit. It'll be it's like it's almost like in some ways it's like I'm in school again, but it's something that I actually really want to study and I'm excited about. So,
and by the way, talking about being in school again, I started taking classes myself in synergology, which is the analysis of body language.
Oh, awesome!
It's great because it really goes well with the neurotyping. It's funny because I was talking to a teacher and we were making connection about personality profiles and nonverbal cues, like what they do with their eyes, with their hands, and posture, stuff like that. It's pretty cool. It's funny because we had a drill, and we had to they because we were making scenarios, and they gave us a card, and we had to act as a certain personality, and they don't have the 5 types, but you either had to be the dominant, either had to be the more submissive, or you had to be the person who just is in the middle ground, like who wants to agree with everybody. It's funny because Stefan and my right hand man, who's also a 2A. Stefan is like my carbon copy, but like he's 6'2" and better looking. But mentally speaking, we're pretty much the same person. It's funny, and we both drew the same card. We had to be the dominant person, and it's funny because as soon as the simulation started, we both stood up and we were just arguing. And when we look at the tapes and the still pictures, we are doing the exact same gestures at exactly the same time. I mean, even when we are pretending to be 1As, we were 2As.
Oh, that's good stuff. That would be a trip to be in that class with you guys. So maybe the CIA or FBI will hire you someday too.
The class itself was awesome because of the people involved. It was limited to 6 people, but it was myself, Steph, my right-hand guy. We had two of my great friends who are very high-level posturologists. So they work with the nervous system, they work with the vestibular system, the proprioceptive system. And one was a good friend of mine who's one of the top interventional nutritionists. So she works with athletes who screwed up their metabolic rate, who just have depression, and use nutrition and supplementation to fix them. So we all had like we basically have the same opinion on everything, but we all have our own perception. So we actually use the synergology material as a sounding board for our own ideas, and it was an awesome group to be part of.
Yeah, it's that stuff is so interesting to me. But I think that's it for our time today. Thank you so much for being on the show, Christian. It was awesome having you back. I learned so much every time I talk to you. So thanks again.
Cool. Let's make it a repeat.
All right, thanks for tuning in for this week's episode. I know it was a long show, but there was so much good stuff in there. If you want to recap as well of a lot of the main points, check out the show notes on justflysports.com. Again, there is a website, justflysports.com. It is interesting how many people I know listen to the podcast, but we do have a lot of good stuff on the website as well. Also, if you want to check out a review of Christian's neurotyping system, that's also on the website as I've gone through it, and it is truly excellent. As always, if you enjoyed this show and what we're up to, don't hesitate to leave us a rating or review on iTunes or Stitcher. We'd really appreciate it, and it really helps spread the word on what we're trying to do as we serve coaches and athletes in this field. Also, don't forget to visit our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology, and they are leaders in distribution of sports science, tech, data, and training aids. Finally, before I let you guys go, don't forget my new book, Speed Strength, is out, and it is in the store at justflysports.com, a product of 3 years of very hard and intensive work and lots of talking with the Darien Bar, but it is finally out, and I think it's awesome. So check that out, and we'll see you guys next week with another great guest.